We just want to thank everyone for joining us. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Andrew is going to be presenting and talking about his book and also his presentation with the Supreme Court and the cases that over the past decade. If you have questions, we'll obviously be doing that towards the end of the presentation. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll be able to ask those of Andrew and try to get as many of those answered as we can. While you're coming on, if you want to throw your name and where you're from in the chat, we'd appreciate that. We'd like to know where everyone is joining us from. So please feel free to throw that in the chat and we'll look at those. And again, questions in the Q&A tab as we're going along, and I'll be sure to ask those of Andrew. And just before we begin a little bit, just want to remind you of two other webinars that we have coming up. So on October 8th, we have Christian nationalism and gun violence. And we have a professor who's has actually a book on that and presenting on that. And then on November 8th, we have Kristen Lee, she's going to be talking about theonormativity. So developing a language for the marginalization of atheists. Hard word for me to say today. But great. Again, we appreciate you being here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're very glad to have Andrew Seidel joining us today. And again, he's going to be talking about, doing a presentation, which also happens to be the same title as his new book, American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. There we go, nice on screen. So Andrew's going to be looking at some of the key Supreme Court cases over the last decade and how religious freedom has been used and turned into a tool to advance privilege and impose conservative Christianity on others. And I think for me, that's just a lot of Christian nationalism that's popping up right now, but I'll let Andrew take that away. Again, his book is going to be hitting shelves in September, and we'll be sending out an email with a recording of this. And so we'll have the link to that book in that email for you. So if you want to share that and purchase the book, we encourage you to do that. And of course, hopefully many of you already know Andrew. He's obviously, has been around for the last decade in this fight with us. He's a constitutional lawyer and is currently working at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Andrew, we're super glad to have you. And this is our first webinar for the semester, so please take it away.
Well, I am just super glad to be here, Kevin. So the feeling is mutual. Thank you all for having me. And this is my first real talk about this book. So, hopefully you enjoy it. Hopefully you learned something. Deus Vult. Deus Vult. God wills it. God wills it. The crowd cheered as Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade in 1905. This was their call to arms. Deus Vult. And in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court under John Roberts issued its own call to arms, and it launched a different crusade. And Kevin, you got it. Christian nationalists and conservative activists heard that call. And this network of faithful and well-funded activist groups, let's call them crusaders, together with the conservative justices on the Supreme Court, launched a crusade to weaponize religious freedom. And this was a war of conquest, not of land. The Crusaders are looking to conquer our Constitution and to remake it in their image. Their religious freedom challenges, their cases that they've been bringing, are superficially about things like Christian crosses and veterans, or playgrounds, or private school vouchers, or bakeries and gay weddings. But really, they're about religious privilege, specifically Christian privilege. Often they're literally about privileging religion over non-religion, Christianity over other religions, and the right kind of conservative Christian over other Christians. Religious freedom could be their weapon to reclaim and entrench their waning status as the dominant caste in America. The goal is to use religious freedom to elevate conservative Christianity above the law, to exempt conservative Christians from the law while disfavoring non-religious and non-Christian citizens who are then required to follow the law. They want that weapon to codify their privilege and supremacy. And the weapon is powerful. It can cut across every law. It's a trump card. It's a silver bullet. It's the golden ticket. Choose whatever metaphor you want. The point is that it trumps other rights and other people's rights. And that's because they're not on a crusade to pass a new rule or a regulation or even a federal law. They are attempting to redefine religious freedom as it is protected by the First Amendment. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and if they can graft their disinformation, their warped version of religious freedom onto the First Amendment, they have that trump card, that silver bullet, right? And again, the weapon is exclusive to, we here on this call, think of religious freedom as something that enshrines equality. That's how it was designed. That's how it operates when it's operating at its best. They think of it as theirs, right? You may wield this weapon if you are the right religion, if you are a conservative Christian. Successfully forging this weapon will codify the receding privilege of this dwindling minority in the face of equality and demographic change. They'll become a special favored class to which the laws do not apply. Of course, again, we're talking about white Christian nationalism again, right? They are reforging religious freedom as a weapon for Christian nationalists, so that there is an in-group of Christian nationalists, which the law protects but doesn't bind, and an out-group of everybody else, which the law binds but does not protect. And this new crusade has dominated American law and conservative politics ever since that Deus Vult in 2010, ever since that call to arms. And that surging wave broke over America in June. So American Crusade, how the Supreme Court is weaponizing religious freedom, traces this attack. And I genuinely do not think you can understand what is happening in the country without understanding this attack. I mean, that's why I wrote American Crusade. So it tells the stories behind the Supreme Court cases that these crusaders have been bringing. It draws back the curtain on this assault. And sometimes we in the legal profession, we get buried under legalese and procedure and judicial philosophies and precedents. Sometimes we hide behind those things. And I found that it's often just better to cut through all of that bullshit and look at the core of a case or of a dispute to get back to the basics. And so American Crusade does just that. And I wrote it for everybody, right? I avoided legal jargon and case names and even legal tests so that everyone can understand the threat and see just how radical and dangerous the decisions that are coming from our high court truly are. Because here is a simple truth. The religious freedom cases that this court has been deciding don't really raise difficult questions. They don't. Can a business refuse to serve a gay couple in violation of civil rights laws because the owner is a conservative Christian? Can the government refuse to issue lawful licenses or documents to a gay couple because the issuing official is born again? Can businesses and officials refuse to serve LGBTQ Americans because their personal God says so? What about Black customers? Do Christian parents have a right to use the government's taxing power to fund their children's Christian schools? Can they do this even though their taxes already pay for an entire school system that's open to all? What if those Christian schools are blatantly bigoted and discriminatory? Can a city council ban certain religious practices in an effort to drive a church out of town? Can business owners thwart laws that grant employees healthcare rights because of what the owner's holy book supposedly dictates? Can government officials use state power and resources to spread Christianity? What about to impose Christianity on a captive audience of school children? What about to erect and maintain a 40-foot tall Christian cross on government property? Can believers ignore rules that protect public health in the middle of a pandemic? Can Christian foster care agencies take public funds and then refuse to serve Jewish foster families? The answer to each question posed in real cases should be no. Legal questions of religious freedom are not always simple. They can be complicated, and often they're emotionally fraught, especially if they involve children. But in the push to weaponize religious freedom, the Crusaders have misled and confounded many Americans about where we draw the legal lines for this founding American principle. So while religious freedom cases may not raise simple questions, they're not that hard. They really aren't. Historically and legally, we draw two basic lines, and then I'll get to a third. The first is we draw a line between action and belief, right? Your right to believe is absolute. Your right to act on that belief is not. So think about all those parents who hear a God telling them to kill their children. They're free to believe that, but the civil law can step in and prevent them from acting on that belief. Belief is unlimited, action is limited. And that brings us to the second line. Okay, so when is it permissible for the government to step in then? And the answer here is pretty simple too. Where the rights of others begin. Your right to swing your religion ends where the rights of others begin. It may end sooner in some cases, but it always ends there. So those two lines, and the third line is even easier. It's the line between church and state. You don't get to use government power given to you by we the people to promote your personal religion, to impose your personal religion on others. So American Crusade lays out those lines and gives you plenty of examples. And then it shows how the court, the Supreme Court of the United States, has warped those lines and the law. But not just those, but also facts and reality to really rewrite these lines or erase them in some cases. So American Crusade looks back at the last decade or so of cases, and I retell those stories, the real stories, and then I apply those three lines. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more in just a second, but first, we need to answer why. Because why this crusade? Why are they seeking this weapon? The answer to that is that it is largely a backlash against equality realized. Conservative Christianity was once able to discriminate on the basis of race, and now that's largely unthinkable. Conservative Christianity was once able to subjugate half the population legally. Conservative Christianity was once able to discriminate against LGBTQ people, but now isn't. As more people realize rights due to them by virtue of being human, the sphere of religious imposition shrinks. And crusaders are trying to reclaim that lost ground. So let me just give you just a few examples. Right? Obamacare. It expanded equality by recognizing the reproductive rights of American women. Right? And Hobby Lobby's conservative white Christian owners fought against that expansion of rights under the guise of religious freedom. The Obergefell decision expanded equality by recognizing the rights of LGBTQ citizens to equal marriage. Masterpiece Cake Shop's conservative white Christian owner and a host of other businesses fought that expansion, claiming religious freedom. You even saw it in the decision itself. And this court is actually going to hear another case about that this term. Brown versus Board of Education. We can go back that far easily. That expanded equality by recognizing the rights of BIPOC Americans to equal access to education. And in the name of religious freedom, Christians pushed for school choice and vouchers and segregation academies. And last month, the court dealt a serious blow to public education and is forcing taxpayers to fund schools born of that racist legacy. White Christian Americans' status as the dominant group is threatened. And when the dominant group or caste in a society feels threatened or left behind by circumstances, it reacts or overreacts by seeking a way to retain that status. And religious freedom is their go-to weapon for this. And there's some really fascinating data to back this up. And I go over that in American Crusade too. And so for one example, a 2021 survey found that simply mentioning the changing religious demographics in America, right? The rise of the nuns, the fact that Christians are not going to be the majority soon, that Protestants are already not. Just mentioning those changing religious demographics elicited a threat response and triggered these defensive political stances among Christians. So simply acknowledging the shifting demographics created this feeling that their religious freedom was threatened. And it actually pushed them towards Christian nationalism and towards Donald Trump. I mean, think about that. They conflate their demographic loss with a threat to their freedom. And that suggests that they fundamentally misunderstand religious liberty as privilege. That they believe freedom means enjoying the trappings of their dominant status. So the crusade is a quest to remake a protection into a weapon for maintaining a dominant group's status in the face of waning demographic power. The expansion of equality and withering religious and racial hegemony is the contested territory in many of the religious freedom cases that we've seen. And then I go over an American Crusade. So just to stick with Obamacare and marriage equality and Brown versus Board of Education as examples, conservative Christians feel that these expansions of freedom violate their rights. But parity is not oppression. Equality, even when it means the erosion of privilege, is not discrimination. We're not even expanding rights or giving new rights. We are recognizing rights that have always existed under the law but were never enforced. We are affirming the humanity of our brothers and sisters and admitting that we've been wrong. And as we realize the aspirational values that are implicit in we the people, in equal justice under law and all are created equal, and the other founding maxims, as we recognize that humans are human and worthy of rights, white Christian America is dying a slow demographic death and rebelling. They are raging against the dying of their privilege. And so they declared war. Deus vult, God wills it. The Crusaders heard that message in 2010. And I explained the case and get into that more a little bit in the book. But the Crusaders heard the message and the floodgates opened. They filed lawsuit after lawsuit. They stoked fear of status loss and they raised millions of dollars. The Crusaders set up these cases and then the justices on the Supreme Court knocked them down. And it started right after the Deus Vult in 2010. So in 2011, the court allowed a voucher program to send taxpayer funds to a religious school, basically by denying citizens' ability to challenge the program. That was a 5-4 decision. In 2012, it said that religious organizations can legally discriminate when hiring clergy, and it weaponized that decision against employees who had no religious duties. In 2014, it said that religious freedom can override the rights of other citizens, 5-4, and then it upheld the Christian-only prayers that the town of Greece was imposing on citizens. And then in 2017, the court forced taxpayers to fund a Lutheran children's ministry and church. In 2018, it rediscovered this potent argument about hostility toward religion. And it used that to let a business owner violate state civil rights laws and discriminate against protected classes of people. That same year, 2018, after bemoaning hostility towards Christians in that case, it upheld Donald Trump's Muslim ban. If you ever need an example of how this is Christian supremacy, that has to be it. In 2019, it abandoned the need for this sham remedy, and it just said, hey, Christian crosses, you can be up on public land. They don't violate the separation of church and state. In 2020, it continued to abandon all pretense, and it said that taxpayers must fund religious schools, another betrayal of our founding principles. Late that year and then into the next is when you had the court striking down public health measures in the name of religious freedom. In 2021, along with those religious freedom COVID cases, you have the court unanimously holding that the Catholic Church can discriminate against a minority in the name of God while it's performing public functions. And then, and it's amazing that this was just a few months ago, it forced Boston to fly a Christian flag over City Hall, the same flag that the insurrectionists carried on the floor of the Senate on January 6th. It abolished reproductive freedom, which is definitely an assault on religious freedom, true religious freedom. It forced taxpayers to fund religious indoctrination at bigoted Christian schools, and it allowed a coach at a public school to impose his personal religion on other people's kids. Now, when I was preparing this talk, I considered diving into one or two or even three of those cases tonight. But I fear that that focus would send the wrong message. Because this is not about any one case, and these cases are not divorced from each other. This is a full-on assault by a rich, powerful network. It's coordinated. All of these cases are connected, just as the justices on the court are connected to the Crusaders. This is all one assault. So I cover all of those cases in American Crusade. And I really think this is a book that it's probably like nothing you've ever read. It's not a law book. It's exposing an attempt to warp our law. It shows that the justices on the court are eager and ready to take these cases. They want to take these cases, right? The Supreme Court typically rejects something like 99, 98, 97% of the cases that come its way. But it decides almost every religious freedom case that comes its way in favor of conservative Christians. This Supreme Court wants to decide these cases. So American Crusade tells you what really happened in each case, because not only did I live many of these cases and follow them closely, this has been my whole career. I litigated some of them, I briefed others, I've been on the front lines defending our country from this assault. American Crusade shows you that the conservative justices on our court will bend reality to fit their desired outcome. They'll ignore facts, they'll ignore photographic evidence to adopt what other judges warned them are, quote, deceitful narratives. But I also dug deeper in the book. I interviewed the people who were involved in these cases, and I scoured the archives and other records. So for instance, in the gay wedding cake case that most people are probably familiar with out of Colorado, the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, I interviewed the couple that everybody seems to forget was a part of this case, Charlie Craig and David Mullins. I interviewed the members of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission that the Supreme Court basically called anti-religious bigots, one of whom began fighting for civil rights after hearing Martin Luther King speak about civil rights on the National Mall, something about a dream. And the other supposed anti-religious comment from one of the commissioners who was quoting a New Mexico Supreme Court judge and who got into this civil rights game to give back to his community. That the conservative justices on our Supreme Court are not impartial jurists who are carefully working to determine the meaning of a constitutional provision without bias, right? The Crusaders didn't pack the court to put on impartial justices. These are zealots. They're ideologues who want to decide these cases in ways that privilege and protect the status of conservative, heteronormative white Christian men. The justices are Crusaders too. And I talk about how they got onto the court. So Leonard Leo is universally recognized as the man who orchestrated the hostile takeover of the Supreme Court. And I quote a former employee who described Leo's mission. He said, Leo figured out 20 years ago that conservatives had lost the culture war. Abortion, gay rights, contraception, conservatives didn't have a chance if public opinion prevailed. So they needed to stack the courts. They did. They did. Two of the biggest players fighting to take over the court are the Judicial Crisis Network and the Federalist Society, were. And Leonard Leo ran both. Overall, Leo's groups spent about $540 million hacking the court from 2014 to 2020. Just yesterday, the news broke that Leo's new group raised 1.6 billion with a B, from a single donation. That's $1 billion more than they spent capturing the court from one donation. So you'll learn about all that and more. You'll learn about the fact that Leo is a conservative Catholic and a member of the Knights of Malta. The Knights of Malta is a Catholic order that traces its origins back to the Knights Hospitaller and the First Crusade. He's literally a crusader. One investigative journalist was looking at the reach of Leo's shadowy kingdom and how it's steeped in Catholicism. And he wrote that it, quote, seemed ripped from the pages of a Dan Brown novel. Others have said that Leo's faith is paramount to him. When he travels, his staff finds the closest Catholic church so that Leo, just like Clarence Thomas, can attend daily mass. And this is all critical because Leo hand-selected the justices that are now on the court. He described his job, or excuse me, his job was described as, quote, the monitor of the nominee's ideological purity. Right? The monitor of the nominee's ideological purity. So, on all told, Leo is responsible for the confirmation of Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. Thomas is an old friend of his. All 6 of them were members of the Federalist Society. Right? So that's 6 votes on the Supreme Court. Leo personally chose 5 for their ideology, a Crusader ideology. And look, I know this is hard to swallow, but the justices themselves are Crusaders. So let me just give you one example. The man who is now seen as, sort of more centrist and more moderate than the conservative, even though he is absolutely not. Just absolutely not. And I explain that in the book. John Roberts. Right? John Roberts worked in the first Bush's Department of Justice alongside Ken Starr. He wrote briefs arguing that public schools can impose religion on children at graduation ceremonies and that Christian Bible clubs can use public schools to organize. While in the Reagan White House, he supported a constitutional amendment that would allow public schools to impose Christian prayer on school children. And in one legal memo, he wrote, quote, we still have an uphill battle to return prayer to schools. We still have an uphill battle to return prayer to schools. We battle return prayer to schools. That is the language of a crusader. And this ploy to capture the courts worked. Before the courts were packed, the court ruled in favor of religion about half the time in these kind of cases. But under Roberts, one study found that the win rate jumps to 81%. So from around 50% up to 81%. And importantly, this isn't a pro-religion, but a pro-Christian shift. So in earlier courts, mainstream Christianity was favored in about 44% of the cases. Under Roberts, it nearly doubled, up to 85%. So religious freedom is becoming a weapon of Christian privilege. I'm going to wrap up here in a minute so we can do questions, because that's my favorite part of every book presentation. But when Pope Urban II launched that first crusade to the cheers of Deus Vult, he emphasized in his sermon that the Turks had attacked Christians and devastated the kingdom of God. That was how he phrased it. There are other translations, but they're all close. Devastated the kingdom of God. Us versus them. The medieval crusaders, they had to drop their plowshares, strap on their swords, and march to the Holy Land to retake and rebuild the kingdom of God. Conquest. And that was a similar message to the one that Amy Coney Barrett had for new lawyers when she roused them at the Notre Dame Law School graduation in 2006. It was not all that dissimilar. She said that being a lawyer, quote, is but a means to an end, and that end is building the kingdom of God. The crusaders on this court are working to fulfill that swords to plowshares prophecy in the Bible. Wait, Andrew, didn't you just get through telling us that they want to weaponize religious freedom? Now you're saying they want to turn swords into plowshares? The swords to plowshares, that lovely turn of phrase, it signified a new era of peace. But in the biblical story, that peace comes only after conquest and forcible conversion. It says, and it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. That's the book of Isaiah. Continues, and he shall judge among the nations and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares. It's only after the kingdom of God has been established and imposed on all nations, that there will be peace. Basically, war is peace. So once their crusade is successful, once conservative Christians sit atop the hierarchy, the mountain, in the privileged position gained with their weaponized religious freedom, then they'll sue for peace. Thank you. I'm going to leave it there, Kevin. And hopefully we can talk for, do we have 5 hours? Is that what it was to do Q&A?
Just about, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Good.
I think, obviously, I think we're all, familiar with the current cases, the current trajectory over the last year that has felt overwhelming, I think,
Yeah.
and disheartening and sad and those sorts of things. And I would say you didn't make it any better when you kept going back, and I was like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh that one too, yeah. So
Yeah.
so yeah, it's been interesting.
It's been a bad decade. I got into fighting for the separation of church and state in the legal arena right about the time of that Deus Ball. Almost just about the same month, really. And ever since, I've been watching this happen, and it's so different than what you learn about the separation of church and state and what we expect. And I don't think a lot of people have put the puzzle pieces together until June. And people are finally starting to wake up and be aroused. Now, some of the people on this call probably have, because this is an issue you care about more. But I think a lot of Americans for a very long time have taken the separation of church and state for granted. Right? It's a thing that's out there that exists. It's kind of a truism, right? And not realized that there was this all-out assault on it and that we're losing it. And we're about to get a real, very real lesson in what it is like to live in a country without the separation of church and state. And I don't think we're ready for it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm going to get to some questions here. But I think one of the things you sort of mentioned is the stacking of the Supreme Court. And I think you also alluded to how long they have been stacking state and federal courts all along the way. And so I think this was the, one of the last hinges in that of being able to do.
Yeah. They've been building towards this for, they issued that call to arms, but that was the public side of it. I mean, this has been, the push to capture the courts has been going on for several decades. This is what I've noticed in the wake of June and all of these decisions, from, losing reproductive freedom, having reproductive freedom stolen from us, to, allowing coaches to impose their religion on other people's kids, all of this that I talked about, is that everybody is looking for a quick fix. And there's not one. Like, the answer is we have to build power the way that they did. And that is a long process. It's one of the reasons I'm thrilled to be working at Americans United. We've got a plan in place. We're pushing this now. I encourage everybody to join if they can. And if you're a student, we've got a ton of cool stuff at Americans United going on for students. But I mean, we are playing a long game, just like Leonard Leo did.
Well, great. Well, and I think Roe versus Wade and the overturning of that has obviously, been important for everyone. Jim asks, he says, how does the current anti-abortion Roe versus Wade, how is the current anti-abortion Roe versus Wade not a direct violation of separation of church and state?
Oh, I think it is a direct violation of the separation of church and state. So I just turned in yesterday to the publisher a massive update on the book. It'll be in the ebook and it'll be in the audio book when that releases, but it'll be up on the website, for my personal website, for people to see. There'll be a link in the book that you'll be able to follow, and so you can actually read the update, so you don't have to buy multiple copies. And that's one of the points that I try to make in that update. If you listen to the legislators who pass abortion bans, they are not shy about proclaiming that they are doing God's will, that they're acting for Jesus. I mean, which state? Indiana passed one just a couple of weeks ago, and it was like a church service watching them pass this ban. And that is imposing one narrow conception of religion, conservative Christianity, on the entire country. That is very clearly a violation of the separation of church and state. And I don't think it's an accident that it comes at the end of a decade of assaulting that wall and trying to tear it down, trying to erase those three lines that I mentioned earlier, right? I mean, that is not a coincidence. That is part of the orchestrated plan.
Definitely. And Jonathan, so this is a little bit of the flip side of a different look on Roe versus Wade. Jonathan says, regardless of what position one takes personally on abortion, shouldn't one nonetheless support the overturning of Roe versus Wade, given that the ruling seems to build its case upon misreading of the 14th Amendment? So no. Abortion should not be the Supreme Court decision, but should rather be put back into the hands of the individual states where they can make their decisions.
No. I mean, like, let's take the religious freedom example of that. It's up to states to determine whether or not you have religious freedom to be an atheist, or you have the religious freedom not to go to church on Sundays, right? Like, we're not actually saying that you don't have that right. We're just giving it back to the states, right? Or think about it with free speech, right? Like, we're not saying, I mean, it's put it in any other right that you hold dear. I think Jonathan, you said, asked this question. Pick whichever right that you hold most dear, Jonathan, and then just imagine them saying, well, we're going to leave it up to the states whether or not that right exists. No.
Yeah. My thing often comes down, I'm sorry, but our freedoms aren't up for vote. Our freedoms are guaranteed under the Constitution, and that comes with all of those. So Lawrence asks taking a little bigger. Lawrence asks, how do we know the limits of the free exercise clause, and where is that codified?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, Lawrence. And I think there's been just a lot of deliberate attempts to muddy those waters. And so this is one of the first things I kind of address in the book. And I actually start the book out with what I think is the easiest example. Jesus, take the wheel. Right? Does anybody out there listening to this believe that people who genuinely hear Jesus telling drivers that he's going to take the wheel, that they have a religious freedom right to do that? There are a lot of examples of it. I recount some of them in the book. I've not found a person yet willing to say that, yes, you have a right to recklessly endanger everybody on an interstate, or end up putting your car through a house, as has happened in several of these cases, because you can claim religious freedom, right? There clearly are limits. And that's the first step. A lot of people just assume I have a right, therefore it's limitless. And that's simply not true. And so early on in the book, I go through the different lines that we draw when talking about this. And there's that first line between action and belief, right? So your belief can be, that's about the only unlimited right you have under the Constitution, the right to think freely, right? We can't police your thoughts. There's no such thing as thought crime. But we can police your actions. And your right to act on those beliefs can absolutely be limited by the government. And typically where we allow the government to step in is when those actions, be they motivated by religious beliefs or some other belief, affect somebody else's rights, right? And this is the very easy answer to some of the hard questions that pop up. COVID, your right to worship does not include the right to risk the health and safety of an entire community. It just doesn't. So I do not think these questions are all that hard. I think they've been deliberately, the waters have been deliberately muddied. And then again, the third line is the line separating church and state, which is you don't get to abuse the power of an office that was created by we the people to promote your personal religion.
Yeah, and I think during your conversation or your presentation, you talked about a lot of different cases. And so River asks, is there any particular item on the right-wing agenda that you believe can be separated from Christian nationalism?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I mean, Christian nationalism really does seem to be like the motivating factor. And there have been a few that like I things that even I was surprised to discover. Not recently, but back when I was first learning and researching about Christian nationalism back in 2016, 17, even before in some cases. You're doing the webinar on guns and Christian nationalism, and I think a lot of people don't grasp how strong that tie is, and how much it motivates those stances for a lot of folks. A lot of the anti-democratic stances, thoughts on police, racial discrimination. I mean, you name it, it's kind of there. And by the way, the manifestation of religious freedom as a way to protect and privilege Christian nationalists is also everywhere too. And I get into that in the book. You will see religious freedom now invoked in the strangest of places, including I have one mention in a push to fight against one of the infrastructure bills that the Biden administration was passing. People raised religious freedom objections to that. So, I mean, it really is everywhere.
So good. I was going through a bunch of questions. There's multiple questions and asked in sort of different ways. And it sort of really is. So whether it's advice for students or advice for just general people, like, okay, now what? What do we do? There's just a ton of questions all about that. Okay, great. What do we do? What do we do?
Yeah.
What do we do?
Yeah, it's not a good idea to scare the shit out of people and not give them a solution. I should think of that when I'm giving these presentations. I mean, there are a lot of things that I think you can do. I think one is to shift your expectations. There is no quick fix. I always tell people, voting is literally the least you can do. Okay? It's crucial and it's important, but it's literally the least you can do. If you want things to change, you need to be doing a lot more than voting. But you've got to be voting. I would recommend you join AU, right? Americans United for Separation of Church and State. We are an advocacy organization. We bring people together of all religions and none to protect the wall of separation. It's right there in our name. We've been doing it for 75 years. Again, we have amazing youth fellowship programs and essay contests. I think our essay contest is going on right now. And we have long argued and fought to ensure that church-state separation remains that shield that protects true religious freedom and protects all of us from government overreach. And we can only do that as Americans united. And that's why I'm so proud to be part of that organization. Embodies this value in its very name. And if AU is not for you, go out and join one of the other secular organizations that are fighting for this. I mean, it's not just that Christian nationalism and religious freedom cut through everything. The separation of church and state does too. The other way, whatever progressive issue you care about, having a robust separation between church and state, between religion and government, is going to advance your work in that arena. I mean, like just about every single issue. I can't think of one where it doesn't. I would love for people to buy the book and understand it, because I get into that in the last couple chapters too. Other things that you can do, concrete, real things. I also remember what it was like to live off of student loans. So put it on your wish list, tell your family to get you a copy, or this is also great. Go to your local library or college library and tell them to order some copies. Do not, whatever you do, this is crucial. Do not send copies of my book to Pastor Greg Locke. He burned the last book that I wrote, and I would much prefer people to read it. So, and the other thing is to talk about this. I think we really do need to try to reclaim religious freedom. I dedicated the book to Christian nationalists. I explained to them, we're not coming for your rights. We're coming for your privilege. I think taking and tackling these issues head on is really important too.
And I'll just add in there, I think we have seen some of our alumni. We have Sarah Henry in Florida, who's running for representative in, state representative in Florida. We have one of our donors is running for, I think it's in Wisconsin. So, run for office. And, big office, state office, yes, a lot of money. Run for your school board. Some school board votes are decided by like 11 people. Like those are things that we can do. And we know the religious right has been trying to take over school boards. And I think Hemant Mehta just posted a big thing about, bringing people on, bringing candidates on in front of the church,
Mhm.
and please vote for them for school board because we want to take over the school board. So those are simple things, easier things that we can do as well, just in our own local communities, that do make a really big impact.
Yeah, I want to second that too, because I think that's absolutely crucial. When I was going around doing the tour for my first book, The Founding Myth, I said that at every stop. And I know the biggest response that I got from people who were hesitant or reluctant to run for office was that they would say things like, well, I'm not really qualified. I mean, what do I know about school boards? And like, just look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? Like you are more qualified than the vast majority of the people who hold office in America right now. If you are a thoughtful skeptic, especially, I feel very confident in saying that. And I mean, Kevin, you're absolutely right, and I talk about this a lot in the last few chapters of the book. The public schools are kind of the last bastion of the separation of church and state, and it's going to be one of the last dominoes to fall in this crusade. And we're starting to see that happening. I mean, the assault on public schools is just intensifying. I wrote about it for Religion Dispatches too a little while ago. I mean, this is what the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida is about. There's so much that's happening on this front. I would really encourage anybody watching to go run for your local school board. And if you can't do that, go to some of the meetings and speak up against the bigots and the book banners and the book burners and the Christian nationalists there.
Yeah, schools are happening quick. I mean, our lawsuit, AU and American Atheists represented secular students in a lawsuit against the Department of Education, mm-hmm. going against Betsy DeVos's guidance, which allow Christian groups to discriminate against other students and get student fees. And yep. We're actually working. We're trying to get students to the law coming up in Missouri, the campus right to discriminate bill. So getting students to go in and testify against that as well.
Yeah.
I want to jump back to questions. Little side tour there. So Heather asked, you mentioned the conservative justices want to hear religious freedom cases. Mm-hmm. And it's clear from Thomas's concurring Dobbs opinion, where he stated that the court should consider all of the court's other cases, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Oberfeld. So her question is it legal for the justice to basically ask for cases to be manufactured like this?
I mean, there's nothing to stop them, right? And this is part of the problem with our Supreme Court right now. We have relied historically on the restraint of the justices themselves to restrain the institution as a whole. And that does not exist anymore. They are drunk on power, and they're not being checked at all, right? Nothing is being done to stop them or to prevent. Congress is not trying to step in and say you are out of bounds here, even though that is Congress's role. Neither is President Biden, right? Like, it's a system of checks and balances that should be happening, and instead there's a lot of hand wringing going on about the court and what to do about it. There are a lot of different solutions out there, but I mean, one thing that could certainly happen. I mean, Justice Thomas is sort of the poster child for a lot that's wrong with our court. There's no ethics rules that actually bind and can be enforced. That's the most important part, really, against the justices. So if your wife is, part of an attempted coup to, overthrow the government, you sit on the Supreme Court. There's nothing to get you off of cases that decide whether that attempted coup was legitimate, for instance. I mean, that's a real thing that is happening right now with our Supreme Court. It's unbelievable. And I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg there. I mean, this is a highly political, ultra-conservative supermajority on this court. And I do get into a lot of that in American Crusade. I mean, three of them worked on the Bush versus Gore litigation. Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. While that Bush versus Gore litigation was going on, like Thomas's wife was actually seeking resumes for people to go work in the Bush White House, even though we didn't know who won the election yet. I mean, it's just all kinds of misdealings going back so long. I mean, this is it's a very big problem, and it's something that I get into. One of the big pieces of news that broke, that's in the update for American Crusade, which again is going to be up on my website, is that these crusaders have been in the Supreme Court praying with the justices, what they call spiritual conditioning, getting them to be more comfortable with making these conservative decisions and opinions that overturn Roe versus Wade and that actually weaponize religious freedom. So that is, I mean, the court itself is part of the problem.
Yes. So just sticking on Dobbs for a little bit, Kent, he says, Judge Alito railed against secular values and basically saying that those were anti-religious freedom. The dismissiveness of secularism he says, is sort of evidence that he and the Supreme Court, their religious discrimination also impacts religious people. Kent happens to be Unitarian Universalist. He says, why does it, I don't know if this is just specific to the media, and I'm sure you have some feelings about this as well, but why does the media not address blatant religious discrimination against religious people who are not just conservative Christian?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very hard question. The media does a remarkably bad job about talking about, first of all, legal issues, and second of all, religion. Like, I mean, if the media seems to not want to touch religion generally. Most likely because they know they're going to offend some of their readers, which is going to affect their bottom line, right? There's no way to talk about religion in their minds without offending somebody. And so they often blow it. I'm not a media critic. I did have a whole section on Fox News in the book that I cut, though it was fascinating. Maybe I'll put it up somewhere else. I mean, and conservative media certainly with their disinformation campaigns and the attempts to capture the court played a huge role in this crusade. Huge role.
So a lot of talk about other religions. There's lots of questions, a combination of questions where for other religions like the Satanic Temple, so their sort of fight and strategic fight to use that to fight religious freedom. But I also think there's in there of, there's some Jewish groups and Christian groups and Hindu and other religions who have now filed court cases, even in Florida, saying, hey, some of what you're doing is violating my religious rights. So how does that, I guess it's sort of the flip side of the non-Christian rights?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and it's something that I do spend a lot of time on in the book, and I've spent a lot of time talking to reporters about this too, because we understand religious freedom as an equal right possessed by all. It doesn't matter whether or not you're a minority religion or a Christian or a conservative Christian or a Christian nationalist, right? Or an atheist or a non-believer. That doesn't matter. You all have the same right to religious freedom. That is not how the crusade understands religious freedom. In fact, the goal of the crusade is to upend that legal understanding of religious freedom. Right? And this is what Alito was talking about in Rome. I mean, he essentially confessed this much in my mind. This is the goal of the crusade. For this court, religious freedom belongs to conservative Christians. And conservative Christians have so much religious freedom that they can impose their Christianity on half the country, right? That's Dobbs, right? That's overturning Roe. So I think we don't grasp, nor should we, but that's part of why I wrote this book, that the goal of these cases, of these justices, of this crusade, is to discriminate in favor of conservative Christians, right? So there was this case that just came down about funding private Christian schools that are horribly discriminatory against LGBTQ people in Maine. And for the court said that the government must use its taxing power to fund these schools, right? Because it has funded some other private secular schools, it must also fund these Christian schools. And so you get these responses, invoking our friends at the Satanic Temple, right? I can't wait to see the Satanic Temple open a school in Maine. Same thing for the coach prayer case, right? So the Supreme Court upheld this decision about, upheld a coach imposing prayers on students after football games at the 50-yard line, right? We know the students felt pressured to pray. They said as much, and the court said, that's fine. We're going to look at the coach's religious freedom because he's a conservative Christian, right? So you got that same response in the media and online, and some of my friends to that case. Paging Satanic Temple looks like it's time for some post-game Baphomet rituals, and you hear a lot of people, even in op-eds, talking about this the same as Muslims, right? What are we going to support a Muslim school now? What about a Muslim coach praying on the 50-yard line? But all of those ideas, all of those rejoinders, all of those arguments are premised on the idea that religious freedom is equal in principle, that it applies equally, that we have, as the words on the Supreme Court say, equal justice under law. We're supposed to. We did, but we don't. We didn't in those cases, right? The separation of church and state has always been a check on Christian privilege and supremacy, right? That third line that I was talking about, that guarantees equality. People don't get that the separation of church and state guarantees equality, right? Religion's not favored over non-religion, no religion's favored over another. That's why it's the central target of this crusade. The conservative justices don't understand religious freedom as a universal freedom, but as a Christian privilege. They didn't ignore the religious freedom of every taxpayer in Maine or students at Bremerton High School. They wrote their freedom out of existence because it wasn't conservative Christianity. And I really cannot stress this enough. That is the point of these cases. That is the goal of this crusade. And it's happened in other cases in the past. I mean, the Muslim ban is a perfect example, right? That should have been struck down immediately. And if it had been a ban against Christians, it would have. People forget that same Muslim ban actually favored Christians. There's been some crazy stuff happening in some death penalty cases about providing spiritual solace to condemned prisoners, and nobody won until it was Christians who were making that argument. This court does not understand religious freedom as a universal freedom. For them, it is a Christian privilege, and that is the entire point of the crusade. That's why those arguments don't hold a whole lot of water, I think.
And to me, the religious freedom, quote unquote, was chosen as the term because it's a nice marketing and nice little package. Because it's really, if you call it what it is, it's Christian nationalism.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly part of it, but it also allows them to pirate the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. And if you can claim a First Amendment right, that cuts through a lot of other things, like civil rights laws, like public accommodations laws that force your business to be open to everybody, regardless of skin color or LGBTQ status in a lot of places. So, I mean, it's not just that it's good marketing, it's also a very powerful weapon.
Yeah. So Sohan asks, he says, do you think that Carlson versus Macon will lead to conservative-led states deliberately creating gaps in their public education to leave so that religious schools are easily able to take over at taxpayer expense?
Oh yeah, and this is something that I talk about in the book a lot. It's the crusade is to destroy public schools. I mean, Jerry Falwell was explicit about this. He wrote about it. The person, Kyle Olson, who started National School Choice Week, said that he thought Jesus would destroy the temple of public education. Right? I mean, that is exactly what they were trying to do. Um, it, yeah, I mean, I think I can leave it there. And for the folks chatting about Satanic Temple ritual at the public high school in Bremerton, got all that info in the book.
So, Jeff asked an interesting question. He goes, I hate to ask this question, but here it goes. So, in our democratic republic,
Yeah.
if freely and fairly elected elected officials at the local, state, and federal level pass laws and appoint state, local, and federal Supreme Court justices who approve those laws that impose religious bias in their laws, such as outlawing abortion or forbidding same-sex marriage, isn't this then ultimately a question of who wins the election? And elections have consequences?
I mean, yes, elections do have consequences. I don't think anybody would I certainly wouldn't argue against that, I guess. But I mean, to me, that just goes back to, yeah, like one of the things we need to be doing is building power. One of the things we need to be doing is not just voting and expecting that to change things. Again, voting is literally the least you can do. You must do significantly more if you want this to change. Now, there are definitely arguments to be made that our system is anti-democratic in a lot of respects, and there are, I mean, the Electoral College being like a very good example, the Senate being another very good example. There are aspects of our system that were intended to be anti-democratic. And this court, again, to bring it back to Dobbs, right? It's not an accident that this court gutted the Voting Rights Act and okayed partisan gerrymandering before they overturned Roe versus Wade and abolished reproductive freedom, right? They made it harder to hold officials, and including themselves, accountable at the ballot box before they started doing some of the craziest things that they were doing. And I mean, that's not an accident either. And again, this is all part of a deliberate attack. It's part of a crusade.
Yeah. And I think another important, we've got to vote. We have to go out and vote because, yes, elections have consequences and we have to go out and vote. Well, good. We're hitting 5 o'clock. So I just want to be respectful of your time and everyone else's. So I just want to, thank you so much for presenting today. And clearly there is a ton of information in this book. And I look forward to getting it and reading it. I got the last one. I read the last one.
I appreciate that. And I've been kind of keeping an eye on the chat. And I have to say, like, a lot of the stuff that people are asking, I'm sorry we didn't get to some of it, but I've not seen something that at least is not touched on a little bit in the book. So if you have questions, go pre-order American Crusade. And don't forget to check the update on the website when that goes up. It comes out on September 27th. I think it's worth your time. Wouldn't be here otherwise.
I was talking to someone yesterday who gave our office a call, and I said, we were talking about things. I said, oh, don't forget we have the webinar tomorrow. This one today. Mm-hmm. He goes, I've just been so depressed about everything that's been happening. He goes, is the webinar going to make me feel better? And I said, yeah, probably not.
yeah, probably not. But I prefer to tell the truth rather than comfortable lies. I mean, and honestly, like, this can and should be a wake-up call for all of us, right? Like, there is no quick solution to this. It's not going to happen overnight. Like, we have to take the time and play the long game and build power. And we can do it. I really think we can do it. I would not be here. I would not spend my personal time, when my tummy is rumbling, guys. Like, I would not be here if I didn't think we could win this fight. We can win. The numbers are on our side. The whole reason this fight is happening is because they are seeing the waning demographics. They know they are on the way out. That's why they're doing this, right? We're gonna win. We just have to fight.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about working with secular youth, well, just youth in general, but is if we look at the numbers, the number of non-religious youth in the United States is just growing like crazy. And the reality is every time Marjorie Taylor Greene opens her mouth and says we should all be Christian nationalists. And when they overturn Roe versus Wade, and when we look at what vouchers are doing to the educational system, which I know AU is just on top of like crazy, I always say that I said the conservative religious right is making more atheists every day than our organization could ever do. And that's not my goal. My goal isn't to make more atheists. But there's a reality of they are so askew in what they were doing and so horrible and so hypocritical. And without moral and value, good ones at least. They are making young people, it's so obvious, they're making young people turn away from religion faster than I think anyone else can. So good. I just want to, so thank you very much. Again, totally appreciate it. Love having you on every single time.
Yeah.
For those people on, we will have a recording of this video. So if you want to share it with other people, you are more than welcome to do that. We'll send you a link to the video. We'll send you a link to pre-order the book. So truly appreciate everyone's time here today. And Andrew, as always, thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting me. Always fun.